The clock struck midnight as Ethan Miller sat alone in his small apartment, the rain pounding against the window. A sudden buzz from his old landline jolted him upright. The voicemail played, static hissing. A trembling voice whispered, "They know where you are," before cutting out sharply. Ethan's heart raced as silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. Moments later, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the dark alley below. Ethan grabbed his coat and rushed outside, scanning the deserted street. No one was there. His breath fogged in the cold night air. Then, under the flickering street lamp, he saw it, a strange, ancient letter lying on the wet pavement. The paper was yellowed, marked with strange symbols that seemed to twist under his gaze. Ethan muttered, "What the hell is this?" as the air grew unnaturally cold around him, and a shadow flitted across the corner of his vision. Ethan returned to his apartment, dripping wet, the letter clutched tightly in his fist. He placed it on his kitchen table and stared at it under a single dim bulb. The paper was brittle, covered with symbols that seemed older than anything he'd ever seen. His mind raced with questions. He whispered, "Who left this for me?" The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows as he flipped the letter over. On the back, faintly scratched, were the words, "It begins tonight." Ethan's stomach dropped. Suddenly a knock sounded at the door, slow and deliberate. His pulse quickened. "Who's there?" he called out, voice trembling. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. When he opened the door, no one was there, only wet footprints leading away into the hallway darkness. The next morning, sunlight barely cut through gray clouds as Ethan walked to a nearby cafe. He needed answers. Inside, he spotted Lucy Harper, a barista and neighbor who often greeted him warmly. Lucy, sensing his unease, asked, "Row night?" Ethan forced a smile and replied, "You could say that." He carefully mentioned the scream, the letter, and the strange symbols. Lucy's eyes widened. She confessed she'd seen a shadowy figure outside Ethan's building the night before, but assumed it was her imagination. Her voice trembled as she added, "Be careful, Ethan. Something's not right." Ethan nodded, realizing he wasn't the only one haunted by what had happened. Later that day, Ethan returned home, clutching coffee and replaying Lucy's words in his head. As he neared his building, movement caught his eye. A tall figure stood in the alley where he'd found the letter. Ethan called out, "Hey, who are you?" The figure turned slowly, face obscured by a hood. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the alley. Ethan sprinted forward, but when he reached the spot, the figure was gone. Only a faint smell of smoke lingered. On the wall, barely visible, was a mark matching one of the symbols from the letter. Ethan's breath caught as fear crept deeper into his bones. That night, Ethan tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the letter's symbols burning into his mind. In one dream, he stood in a dark forest, surrounded by whispers. A ghostly voice said, "You cannot escape." Ethan jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The room was silent, yet he felt watched. From the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows. He turned sharply, but nothing was there. Outside, the wind howled, and the storm returned. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, clutching the letter, knowing that whatever had begun was far from over. Ethan paced his living room, clutching the letter tightly. He needed help, but didn't know whom to trust. Finally, he called his longtime friend, Mark Turner, who had always been his voice of reason. Mark arrived looking uneasy, glancing around as if expecting danger. Ethan explained everything, his words tumbling out: the voicemail, the scream, the mysterious figure, the footprints. Mark ran a hand through his short dark hair and said, "Ethan, this sounds insane. Are you sure you're not just seeing things?" Ethan glared, anger mixing with desperation. "Do I look like I'm imagining this?" he snapped. Mark sighed heavily and replied, "I want to believe you, but this could get us both in serious trouble." Fear and loyalty battled within Mark as he reluctantly agreed to help, though his voice trembled as he added, "But if this gets too dangerous, I'm out." The next morning, Ethan and Mark sat at the local library under buzzing fluorescent lights. Old newspapers were spread across the table. Ethan flipped through fragile pages, his hands shaking. Mark scanned headlines, muttering, "Half of this town's history is missing." Suddenly, Ethan froze, pointing to a small article dated 20 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman found dead under mysterious circumstances." The victim's name sent chills down Ethan's spine. Amelia Harper, Lucy's aunt. Ethan whispered, "It's connected. It has to be." Mark frowned, studying the article. "The case was closed with no explanation," he said. As they leaned closer, Ethan noticed a faint sketch of a strange symbol in the article, identical to the one on the letter. The air grew colder, and both men exchanged a nervous glance. Later, Ethan visited Lucy at the cafe, letter hidden in his jacket. Lucy wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him curiously. "You look worse than yesterday," she said softly. Ethan hesitated before revealing Amelia's name. Lucy's face paled and her voice cracked as she replied, "Amelia was my aunt. She died when I was 8. They said it was an accident, but my family never believed that." Ethan gently placed the article on the table. Lucy stared at it, tears welling. "She was kind, strong, always looking out for me. And then, she was just gone." The cafe felt suddenly colder, as if Amelia's spirit lingered. Ethan reached out and said, "Lucy, this letter might be tied to her death." Lucy's hands trembled as she whispered, "If that's true, we're in danger." Following Lucy's revelation, Ethan sought out Thomas Green, a local historian rumored to know about the town's darkest secrets. Thomas lived in a dusty, cluttered attic filled with old books and relics. The eccentric man in his late 50s greeted Ethan with a wild grin. "I've been expecting you," he said cryptically. Ethan stiffened, clutching the letter. Thomas examined it under a flickering lamp, his fingers tracing the symbols. "These aren't random," he muttered. "They're warnings. This letter isn't just old paper, it's a doorway." Ethan's skin prickled. "A doorway to what?" he demanded. Thomas chuckled, though his eyes were serious. "To the truth. And to death, if you're careless." His words hung in the air, chilling Ethan to the core. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, the letter spread out on the table. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Every creak of the building made him flinch. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. Ethan's breath caught as a whisper filled the room, low and indecipherable. He spun around, but no one was there. The whisper grew louder, overlapping voices surrounding him. His pulse pounded as he grabbed the letter, shouting, "What do you want from me?" The voices stopped abruptly. A single word formed on the fogged window: "Run." Ethan stumbled back in terror, clutching the letter as the room plunged into darkness. In the silence that followed, he realized he wasn't just being watched. He was being hunted. The following morning, Ethan and Mark returned to the library, following clues Thomas had hinted at. A strange draft led them to a locked maintenance door in the basement. Mark pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a narrow stairway leading down into darkness. The smell of mildew and decay was overwhelming. Ethan's flashlight flickered as they descended into a hidden room filled with dusty crates and crumbling papers. On the far wall, a massive symbol, identical to the one on the letter, was painted in faded red. Ethan whispered, "This place shouldn't exist." Mark swallowed hard and muttered, "This feels wrong, Ethan, like we're trespassing on something alive." A sudden noise echoed behind them. They spun around, but no one was there. The shadows seemed to close in, pressing against their fear. As they fled the hidden room, Ethan and Mark emerged into the alley behind the library. A tall man in a long black coat stood waiting. His face was half hidden by shadows, but his piercing eyes glinted coldly. "You shouldn't have opened that door," he said in a low, gravelly voice. Ethan stepped forward. "Who are you? What do you know about the letter?" The man ignored the question, instead handing Ethan a small rusted key. "This opens the next truth," he whispered cryptically. Mark snapped, "Enough riddles, tell us what's going on." The stranger turned to leave, adding only, "They've been watching you since the moment you touched that letter." Then he vanished into the mist before either of them could react. Ethan and Mark barely made it back to Ethan's apartment before they realized someone was already inside. The door hung slightly open. Mark raised the crowbar as Ethan pushed the door with trembling hands. Inside, drawers were overturned, papers scattered, and the letter was gone. A sudden crash came from the bedroom. A masked intruder lunged at them, swinging wildly. Mark blocked the attack, and Ethan grabbed a lamp, smashing it over the intruder's shoulder. The attacker hissed and fled through the window, disappearing into the storm. Ethan gasped, "They know exactly where we are, Mark." Mark nodded grimly, saying, "We need to move fast. Whoever that was, they weren't here to steal. They were here to silence you." Later, Ethan confronted Lucy, desperate for answers. "Someone broke into my place. They took the letter," he said, his voice strained. Lucy's eyes widened, but she avoided his gaze. I don't know what to say." Ethan noticed her trembling hands and the way she glanced nervously at the door. "Lucy, if you know anything, now's the time to tell me," he pressed. Lucy finally admitted, "My family warned me never to talk about Amelia's death. There are people in this town who will do anything to keep the past buried." Ethan realized with growing dread that Lucy knew more than she'd ever let on. Her whispered plea, "Please don't make me choose between you and them," chilled him more than the storm outside. That night, Ethan sat alone in his car outside the cafe, gripping the steering wheel. His breath fogged the windshield as paranoia gnawed at him. Every shadow seemed to move, every figure on the sidewalk a potential threat. Mark called, warning him to stay inside. Ethan barely heard him, his mind replaying Lucy's cryptic words and the masked intruder's attack. Suddenly, in his rearview mirror, he saw the same hooded figure from the alley, standing perfectly still under a street lamp. Ethan's heart raced. He spun around, but the figure was gone. The silence felt suffocating as he whispered to himself, "I'm losing my mind." But deep down, he knew the danger was very real. And closing in fast. Ethan sat with Mark in the dimly lit library basement, the rusted key clutched tightly in his hand. Mark urged, "We need to figure out what this opens before they come for us again." Ethan slid the key into an old metal locker hidden behind dusty shelves. It clicked open with a sharp snap. Inside were brittle letters, photographs, and a journal marked Amelia Harper. Ethan's hands trembled as he read aloud, "They know my secret. They'll never let me leave alive." Mark's face paled as he flipped through photographs showing Amelia with a man Ethan recognized immediately, the mysterious stranger from the alley. Ethan gasped. He knew her. In the final journal entry, Amelia named a traitor within her family, someone close who betrayed her. Ethan's stomach twisted as Lucy's name appeared, written in trembling ink. Ethan left the library with his thoughts spiraling. He couldn't believe Lucy might be tied to Amelia's death. Across the street, a black sedan idled with its headlights off. Inside, a man watched Ethan through binoculars, the same masked intruder who attacked him earlier, now unmasked and calm. He spoke quietly into a phone. "They're getting too close. It's time to clean this up." The driver, a stern woman with cold eyes, replied, "Understood." The car pulled away slowly, blending into the night. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, sensing danger but seeing nothing. He muttered, "Someone's playing both sides, and we're walking right into their trap," his voice barely audible over the steady hum of the rain. Ethan confronted Lucy at her apartment, his face pale and eyes filled with betrayal. "Your name was in Amelia's journal," he shouted. Lucy recoiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't betray her," she sobbed. Mark, standing between them, tried to calm the chaos. "We need facts, not accusations," he urged. Ethan slammed the journal on the table, the pages fluttering wildly. "She died because someone close to her gave her up," Ethan growled. Lucy's voice broke as she whispered, "Amelia was like a mother to me. I would never hurt her." The room crackled with tension. Mark finally shouted, "Stop! If we fight each other, we're already beaten. Ethan backed away, breathing heavily, unsure who to trust as paranoia fractured their fragile alliance. Desperate for answers, Ethan went to Sheriff Harold Briggs, a man known for his gruff demeanor and shadowy past. The sheriff sat behind a cluttered desk, his uniform wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. Ethan placed the journal on the desk and said, "I need the truth about Amelia's case." Briggs studied the pages silently, then sighed heavily. "Some things are better left buried," he muttered. Ethan pressed harder, his voice shaking. "People are dying, Sheriff. This isn't just history, it's happening now." Briggs finally met Ethan's gaze. "I tried to stop it back then, but I failed," he admitted. "There are powerful people involved. If you keep digging, they'll come after you too." Ethan realized the sheriff was both a reluctant ally and a dangerous obstacle. As Ethan left the sheriff's office, the street outside was eerily quiet. His footsteps echoed against wet pavement. Suddenly, a black sedan roared around the corner. Headlights flared, blinding him. Ethan dove to the side as the car sped past, narrowly missing him. He rolled onto the sidewalk, gasping, rain soaking his clothes. The sedan screeched to a stop ahead, its doors opening. Ethan scrambled to his feet and ran into a narrow alley, heart pounding. Behind him, footsteps pounded closer. He ducked behind a dumpster, holding his breath. The attackers passed by, their shadows stretching across the walls. When the coast finally cleared, Ethan whispered to himself, "They're done watching, now they're hunting." Ethan locked himself in his apartment, shoving a chair under the door handle. The letter lay on the table, illuminated by a single flickering lamp. As the storm raged outside, he stared at the strange symbols until his vision blurred. Suddenly, the symbols seemed to move, rearranging into words before his eyes. A whisper filled the room, low and chilling. "Ethan, find the truth." His breath caught as the voice grew louder, overlapping into distorted cries. Paper shook violently, as if alive. Terrified, Ethan shouted, "What do you want from me?" The voice replied, "Justice. For Amelia." The lamp shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Ethan stumbled back, heart hammering, clutching the letter as though it were a lifeline. Mark arrived moments later, pounding on the door until Ethan let him in. "What the hell happened here?" Mark demanded, scanning the shattered lamp and overturned chair. Ethan's voice shook as he explained the letter's transformation, and the voice demanding justice. Mark's expression hardened, unreadable. "Maybe it's trying to show us something," he said carefully. Ethan narrowed his eyes, sensing a shift in Mark's tone. "You don't seem surprised," Ethan accused. Mark hesitated before replying, "I didn't tell you everything. My brother was part of the original investigation into Amelia's death." Ethan's stomach churned. "Why would you keep that from me?" Mark avoided his gaze and muttered, "Because my brother disappeared, and I think whoever took Amelia took him too." Before Ethan could respond, the temperature dropped suddenly. Frost crept across the window pane. Both men froze as an unnatural wind howled through the room, though the windows were shut tight. The letter lifted off the table and hovered between them. A shadowy figure began to form, tall and indistinct, its face swirling like smoke. Ethan stumbled back, whispering, "Amelia?" The figure's head tilted, a guttural moan escaping as the symbols on the letter glowed brighter. Mark grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to get out of here," he shouted. The entity lunged, sending papers and glass flying. Ethan clutched the letter as they dove through the doorway, the ghostly scream chasing them into the storm outside. Ethan and Mark stumbled through the rain-soaked streets, gasping for breath. They found shelter beneath a bridge, both drenched and trembling. Ethan's voice cracked as he said, "This isn't just about Amelia anymore. That thing, it wants us too." Mark sat heavily against the stone wall, his face buried in his hands. "We're in over our heads," he muttered. "There's no way to fight something like that." Ethan gripped the letter tightly, rage burning through his fear. "I'm not giving up," he growled. Mark looked up, defeated. You don't get it, Ethan. They'll destroy everything. We're nothing to them. For a moment, the storm drowned out their words, leaving only despair and the relentless sound of water rushing below. As the storm began to ease, Ethan stared at the letter, noticing a small symbol in the corner he hadn't seen before. It matched the rusted key given by the mysterious stranger. His pulse quickened. "Mark, this isn't over. This is a map," he said, tracing the symbol with his finger. Mark shook his head. "Ethan, we barely survived tonight." Ethan's eyes blazed with new resolve. "If we run, Amelia's death means nothing. Your brother stays missing, and that thing keeps winning." Mark hesitated, then slowly nodded. Ethan stood, lifting the letter like a weapon. "We end this," he vowed. The two men headed into the darkness, unaware of the shadows following close behind. Ethan and Mark reached Thomas Green's attic, soaked from the storm but resolute. Thomas looked up from his cluttered desk, eyes widening at their bruised and exhausted faces. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he muttered, voice trembling. Ethan placed the letter and rusted key on the table. "We know what this opens. Tell us what's waiting on the other side." Thomas hesitated, then leaned close. "That key unlocks an abandoned chapel on the edge of town. It's where Amelia died and where the truth still festers." Mark clenched his fists. "If we go there, can we stop this?" Thomas's expression darkened. "You might, or you might unleash something worse." Ethan's voice was steel. "We don't have a choice." The room fell silent as they prepared for the confrontation. Night cloaked the ruined chapel in fog as Ethan and Mark crept through the graveyard, their breath visible in the freezing air. The chapel door groaned open, revealing a cavernous interior filled with decaying pews and broken stained glass. Ethan placed the letter on the altar, its symbols glowing faintly. Mark whispered, "Feels like a trap." Ethan nodded grimly. "It is, but we need to draw them out." A distant car engine rumbled outside, followed by footsteps crunching over gravel. The black sedan's crew had arrived. Ethan's pulse raced as he hissed, "Get ready." They ducked behind the pews, gripping makeshift weapons, every nerve taut as shadows moved closer in the fog-choked doorway. The heavy doors slammed open, and the mysterious stranger stepped inside, flanked by two enforcers. His face was no longer hidden, revealing sharp, calculating features. Ethan rose from behind the pew, rage burning. "You were there when Amelia died," he shouted. The man smirked. "Not just there. I made it happen." Lucy's voice suddenly echoed from the shadows. "No!" she screamed, stepping into the dim light, tear-streaked and shaking. Ethan stared in shock. The man sneered. "Your beloved Lucy helped me hide the evidence. She kept you blind, Ethan." Lucy fell to her knees, sobbing. "I never wanted this. I just wanted to survive." Ethan's heart shattered, his trust destroyed as the true betrayal was revealed. As tensions reached a breaking point, the air turned icy. The letter burst into flames without burning, its symbols glowing like molten metal. A deafening scream filled the chapel as Amelia's spirit erupted from the fire, her form towering and wrathful. The enforcers fled in terror, but the stranger stood firm, shouting, "You belong to me." Amelia's spectral figure turned toward him, her voice echoing like 1,000 whispers, "No more lies." She lashed out, sending him crashing into a crumbling pillar. Ethan grabbed Lucy, pulling her back, while Mark swung at the collapsing beams to clear a path. The chapel shook violently, dust and debris falling as the living and the dead clashed. The stranger staggered to his feet, bloodied and desperate. "If I go down, you all go with me," he screamed, grabbing a hidden pistol. Amelia's spirit shrieked and surged forward, wrapping him in tendrils of smoke and light. Ethan shouted, "Amelia, stop!" But the spirit turned to him, her expression a mask of pain and fury. "Justice demands sacrifice," she thundered. Ethan stepped closer, tears streaming down his face. "Amelia, please don't become the monster they made you." For a moment her form flickered, torn between rage and release. With a final agonized wail, she dragged the villain into the spectral mist, disappearing forever. Silence fell. Ethan collapsed, clutching the letters, now blank paper, knowing nothing would ever be the same. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the town eerily silent. The chapel lay in ruins, smoke still rising from its broken roof. Ethan sat on the back steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the horizon. Lucy stood nearby, pale and silent, while Mark tended to a shallow cut on his arm. Sheriff Briggs arrived, his face grim. "The bodies are gone," he said quietly. Ethan looked up, weary. "Amelia?" Briggs shook his head. "No sign of her. Or the stranger." The sheriff's voice trembled. "Whatever happened here? It's beyond anything I've seen." Ethan gripped the blank letter tightly, knowing Amelia's spirit was finally free, but at a devastating cost. The sun rose slowly, casting a fragile light on the wreckage. Later that day, Ethan walked through Amelia's old house with Lucy, dust motes swirling in the sunlight. Her belongings were untouched, frozen in time. Lucy whispered, "It's like she never left." Ethan ran his fingers across a faded photograph of Amelia, his throat tight. "She deserved better than this," he said. In the corner of the room, an old music box began to play on its own, the haunting tune echoing through the silence. Lucy gasped, clutching Ethan's arm. He forced a calm voice. "Maybe it's just the wind." But deep down, Ethan knew Amelia's presence lingered. The letter might be blank, but its story was far from over. A chill passed through them both, heavy with unspoken questions. At a quiet diner on the edge of town, a lone figure sat in the corner booth, the silent observer. This wiry man with piercing gray eyes sipped his coffee slowly, listening as patrons whispered about the chapel's destruction. He unfolded a small notebook filled with sketches of the letter's symbols. A faint smile crossed his face as he wrote a single line. "The cycle continues." Without a word, he tucked the notebook into his coat and dropped cash on the table. As he left, a waitress shivered, sensing something wrong. The bell above the door jingled, and Ethan's world grew more dangerous, though he didn't know it yet. That evening, Ethan and Mark sat outside Lucy's apartment, the sky painted orange and purple by the setting sun. For the first time in days, there was quiet. Lucy handed Ethan a cup of tea, her hand trembling slightly. "Maybe it's really over," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan forced a small smile. "Maybe," he replied, staring at the blank letter folded in his pocket. Mark leaned back against the railing, eyes scanning the darkening street. The three of them sat in fragile peace, a temporary refuge before nightfall. Somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barked, and the first stars began to appear, silent witnesses to what was coming next. Later that night, Ethan awoke suddenly in darkness, the sound of faint scratching filling the room. His heart pounded as he reached for the lamp, but the bulb flickered and died. Moonlight streamed through the window, revealing the letter lying on the nightstand. Slowly, words began to appear on its blank surface, written in Amelia's unmistakable hand. "I was never free." Ethan's breath caught. From the shadowed corner of the room came a whisper, familiar and terrifying. "They know where you are." The exact words from the first voicemail. Ethan froze, eyes wide, as a shadow rose behind him, towering and silent. The screen faded to black as a final, chilling scream echoed.